Fearlessness is a sense of trusting the universe that moves beyond courage, where you don't need that emotion of courage to keep pushing yourself to take a stand.
For the past 30 years, I've lived in the woods along the river in the Shenandoah Valley of West Virginia. A small town, a beautiful home, a close-knit community, a loving family, and a rewarding career as a tech entrepreneur.
David Levine is the founder of Indico. He joins me now from San Francisco.
Joining me now is GeoStellar founder and CEO David Levine, live from our DC bureau, and you are backed by a publicly traded company called NRG. You've got partners galore, but let's first explain to viewers what you're doing.
When the news broke that Rockwool, a Danish stone wool insulation company, was planning to build a heavily polluting factory in our fragile ecosystem, everything changed. Suddenly, it became clear to me that the massive forces of government, industry, and media were aligned against us. I helped organize the opposition. We occupied Senator Manchin's office, blockaded the Danish embassy, and shut down the construction site. We flooded hearings at every level, municipal, county, and state. My investigative articles and documentary videos exposed corruption and revealed the existential threat to our food, our water, our air, our health, and our local economy. Our campaign was powerful enough to bring down corporate executives, firings, resignations, public outrage. But in the end, the movement fractured, and the factory went into production. Exhausted and disillusioned, I retreated to Mexico to visit my friend and mentor, Four Arrows, an Indigenous worldview scholar, activist, hypnotherapist, and performance coach known for his work with elite athletes and powerful executives. My mission was to interview Four Arrows for a feature-length documentary. I came away with something completely different. I'd actually like to start by talking about Standing Rock.
For the world, Standing Rock was a manifestation of the power of organization, of Indigenous generosity and camaraderie, and it struck a chord. Indigenous people who understand traditional ways. We've learned that when we make a commitment to generosity and love and community in behalf of our community and our living relative, the river, we don't need courage anymore. Once we take that step of a commitment, we trust the universe. Whatever happens, even if we take a concussion grenade or a bullet or whatever, and it's the end of this life on this plane, doesn't matter. So we're going to stay there, and we're going to continue with our compassionate resistance, our peaceful resistance. But when you first get shot and hit or hurt or exploded, your first reaction is going to be retreat or fighting. And we don't want you to do that. So you're going to do it, but if you remember what I'm saying, somebody's going to help you. There'll be one of our women, one of our men that's on the line who's not the medics. They'll say, sister, brother, help me out here. Be here with me. I might need your help. And you'll turn around.
Four Arrows has the unique ability to walk in two worlds, the academic and the mystical, the scientific and spiritual, the personal and universal. He shared his origin story, a near-death experience, his vision of the cat and the fawn, an encounter with a shaman, and how he gained his almost magical powers.
I still had a chip on my shoulder, and the way I handled it was doing adventure sports, rock climbing, horse racing, endurance riding, and especially whitewater kayaking. And my good buddy David Carr, a fellow firefighter, we were the first to kayak down the Tuolumne River in hard kayaks. One day I got a book, The Wild Rivers of North America, and they had a story about someone who had attempted the Rio Urique in central Mexico in Copper Canyon, 8,000 feet down, deeper than the Grand Canyon. and he didn't make it. But I told Dave, I said, let's be the first. It was my turn to scout. We had just come into a canyon, but the walls went sheer up. There was no exit of the water. So you couldn't get out of this, and it kept rising. So I was scared. And it was my turn to climb a boulder when I looked over to the left, and here was this beautiful flat eddy. And I went, my luck, I can drop into that eddy. Well, I dropped into it, but instead of it being an eddy, it was essentially the river waiting its turn to disappear into a hole no bigger than this. I could feel my boat being sucked into it. And I kept paddling and paddling and paddling. And I remember Dave got up on a boulder, and I could see his eyes, and he looked at mine, and we both knew I was toast. Then my boat hit the hole, and I knew I was gone. But it stopped. The middle of the boat was wider than the ends and got stuck. So I turned around and saw that in this big boulder, about as tall as this house, there was a channel that went up that looked like I could squeeze my way up it if I could just jump enough to get high enough to grab it and hold it. I remember clearly that when I stood up, and I couldn't balance, so I was holding on to the rock, that when I first touched that rock, I felt peacefulness. But I was busy with my goal to go through the hole. But I remember so distinctly, because I remember writing that down, that I felt that peace. And so I tried that, but the hydraulics of the water, I went down. At that point, I was intensely concerned and frightened. But when I hit the water and went under, I've never been able to describe this. It was the most beautiful, peaceful, tranquil experience that I've ever, before that or after that, have experienced. I saw this incredible white light. I saw people that were enemies shaking hands with me. I saw ancestors that had passed. I heard a kind of a music that was indescribable. And I was just floating free and relaxed and loose and ready to breathe in the water. And then we guesstimate about 40 seconds. Boom, I came out the other end. And of course then all of that left, and I was in a panic again to not go downstream, and swimming as hard as I could to get to the top of the rock. The Tarahumara Indians rescued us after we managed to survive. And two animals that we came upon that were notable on the way out. One was an onça, which is a cat, a mountain lion. And we were going up every day on another shelf as the river was coming up in a cave in a canyon where the walls were thousands of feet straight up. There was no way to escape the river except this cave. And the water kept rising. And we didn't know if, when it got to the top, we were obviously going to drown. And then one night, I felt this walking along the side of my sleeping bag on this narrow ledge. And I looked up and smelled a mountain lion. And it walked over me, and then David, who was in a line with me, walked over him. And of course, like a couple of kids, we started, can you believe what just happened? But we saw he didn't go down to the river, obviously, and he disappeared, so he gave us the way out. That was the cat part. Later, we kept getting lost and coming into dead-end barrancas that thousands of feet down. Again, like climbing out of the Grand Canyon. And Tarahumara, a young man, showed up every day. Where he came from, gosh knows. But he would mark a trail for us. And one day he came and he had a fawn over his shoulders, because the Tarahumara are great runners, and they run barefoot up and down these rocks, and they can chase a deer and run the deer until the deer's feet bleed and cannot run. And then they'll go up and say their prayer, and the animal will give itself to them. And so those were two remarkable animals on the first few days of climbing out. And then on that fourth night, I had a vision And I saw this vision of the cat, the mountain lion, and the baby deer, the fawn. But then all of a sudden I was like in downtown New York by Mama Leone's. I don't know where I was, a big city, right? And CAT was a neon light, C-A-T, flashing on and off. And fawn was F-A-W-N, off and on. And I remember it just mystifying me and captivating me. And that was the beginning of a 15-year exploration to understand my near-death experience, the vision, and what the heck that meant. I really studied this so much, and I wrote an article called The Fear Hypothesis, because I'm saying that the foundation of spontaneous hypnosis is fear. That during fear, all creatures become hyper-suggestible to the communication of a perceived trusted authority figure. And that put everything into perspective about what's happening in the world. And it made sense on so many levels. And then my experience with the Tarahumara and their ceremonies. So I went, oh my gosh, CAT is a hypnotic part of life that we've lost. It's concentration. It's the kind of transformation, good or bad, that can happen from concentration. It's concentration activated transformation. Then I had to figure out what fawn was. The four things that kept coming up in one form or the other that I could use those words were issues surrounding fear, issues surrounding authority, issues surrounding words, music, communication, vibrational forms of expression, and nature. And when those four letters, I could see that covered all the different words that I had used for those ideas. I went, there it is. It's fawn. And the way Indigenous people understand those four things isn't the opposite of the generalized way culture has seen those things for the last 7,000, 8,000 years. And that is the thing that is driving almost everything I've done for the last 30 years.
By the time of these interviews in 2019, I'd known Four Arrows for more than 15 years. I'd visited him at his summer home in a remote fishing village on Vancouver Island, met up with him at his sister's house in St. Louis, and even enrolled in a doctoral program just to take his graduate courses. But this was the first time I'd really pressed him to go beyond the stories and get to the core of his work, the model, the method, the living system he calls the CAT-FAWN Connection. And finally, we got there.
Equation is a compare and contrast equation. The equation is what's the challenge that you're facing right now? What does fear have to do with it? What are you afraid of? If it's from a dominant perspective, it's going to have one answer. What's the authority? Oh, it's something my dad told me when I was little. It's something that the president said. It's something that this book, the Bible, says, whatever, right? Then people realize that external doesn't fit the honest reflection of the whole thing put together. And then they use CAT to reframe it, to reprogram it.
At its core, CAT-FAWN is self-reflection in action, mindfulness shaped by worldview. With practice, it becomes automatic. Fear subsides, authority internalizes, and the words you use guide both mind and body. Every experience turns into a chance for growth. Every challenge, a shift in perspective. Four Arrows offered an example of how quickly that transformation can happen.
I'll give you an example of the power of words. I had at San Francisco when I was doing clinical hypnosis. A wealthy man from San Francisco, executive secretary, calls my secretary and says, I'd like to make an appointment with Dr. Jacobs for hypnosis. So the secretary says, well, Dr. Jacobs would like to talk to the client just briefly. Well, he just want to make an appointment. Well, this is our policy. Okay. So, hi, Mr. So-and-so. So what is it that you want to see? Well, look, I'll be real quick. Whenever I have a meeting I have to go to, I sweat profusely under my arms. I've got 3 suits sitting right in front of me here on my thing, 3 sports jackets and suits. I've had drugs, I've talked to psych, I've done everything. Somebody said I should give you a call. I said, okay, I'll have my secretary make it. Thank you for telling me that. I'll have my secretary talk to you and make an appointment. Oh, by the way, tell me what you say to yourself just before you go into the meeting. I don't know. I look at my watch. I see it's time to go, and I go, I have to go to the meeting. I said, okay. I said, then what I want you to do is just one little small thing. Change the word, I have to go to the meeting, have, to want. And then I'll see you next week. Secretary calls in 3 days, cancels the appointment. Secretary says, why? He thinks you hypnotized him on the phone because he did not sweat. This is one word. We say, I need to do this. It has meaning.
To understand how powerful suggestion can be, 4 Arrows pointed to a series of experiments that proved hypnosis isn't just psychological, it's physiological. What we imagine can literally change the way the brain perceives reality.
About 8 to 10 years ago, a group of scientists did an experiment where they would flash different colored cards in front of a hypnotized person, having hypnotized the person that when they see red, they will see yellow. Instantaneously, when that person saw the red card, they would say yellow. The hypnotized person didn't miss a beat ever. So the scientists took that same experiment after brain imaging came into play, and they began to learn that when people see yellow, there's a particular place in the brain that lights up. When they see red, there's a slightly different place. So these guys did the same experiment. And when that person saw the wrong color, it triggered the part of the brain that was seeing, the color that they imagined and that they were hypnotized to see. Because it was a shocking revelation that hypnosis actually has this kind of biochemical, physiological thing. The working definition that I've used for years, that it's believing in an image so devoutly while in an alternative brainwave frequency, other than the cognitive one that you and I are in now, that then actually changes automaticity, whether it be the autonomic nervous system or a physical ability or a psychological precept.
After years of using hypnosis to heal trauma and even treat his own cancer, 4 Arrows began seeing its shadow side. The same techniques that can heal a burn, slow bleeding, or lower blood pressure can also be turned outward, used to control minds on a massive scale. Hypnosis, he realized, doesn't just shape individuals, it shapes culture.
And that is, I identify what I call red flags of persuasion, how people can recognize when they are being used as a hypnotic subject. Using a double bind, for example, is classic. We hear Donald Trump doing this all the time. A double bind in a hypnosis, in medical hypnosis, or say let's talk about emergency hypnosis. You come upon the scene of an accident, and somebody is all crumbled up and with broken bones and on glass, and they're laying down in great pain. And you come up and you notice that there's nothing wrong with their right arm. And you come up to them and you say, listen, the worst is over, and the ambulance is on its way. I'd like to know, are you more comfortable with your arm over your lap like this, or would you be more comfortable with your arm at your side? That's a double bind. In hypnosis, we're very susceptible to either ors. And because we're very literal in our interpretation. That person will choose, no matter how much pain they're in, and they'll go, yes, my side is better. Then you say, good. Just let that comfort move through your body. And when I count to 3, I want you to just take a nice deep breath and lower your blood pressure, or whatever, to prevent shock, or whatever the situation calls for. It's so powerful. But think of George Bush. You're either with us or against us. Think of all of the examples of either or conversations or mandates, right? It's a hypnotic strategy. The use of humor, joining in. When I was a firefighter, I would come on the scene of a child with asthma, turning blue. This is a life and death situation. And we would get out the oxygen. And while Frank was bringing the oxygen to the kid, the parents were saying, honey, you're gonna be okay, you're gonna be okay. The kid's dying, turning blue, frightened beyond anything. I would kneel down at their level and I would go, oh, it's so hard to breathe, isn't it, honey? It's so hard to breathe. I understand. That must be so frightening. What's the child feeling? Finally, an adult that knows what I'm experiencing. That's a joining in strategy that people will use with hypnosis in various ways. And then what do? I take the lead. Oh, but notice how much easier the breathing is getting. Child follows me. Parents were blown away. Within 20 seconds, the kid was breathing and laughing. These strategies are used by people like Rush Limbaugh all the time, and we are all susceptible because they are natural in the world of communication. But they're more natural when we use them ourselves and we understand them, or when we give intentionally control to someone to help us.
Hypnosis can transform a single mind, altering perception, physiology, even belief. But mass hypnosis transforms entire societies. Worldview is to a culture what mindset is to an individual. It shapes how people see, think, and act. Four Arrows teaches that humanity has lived under two great worldviews, one indigenous, one dominant, and that the latter, though only a few thousand years old, has held the planet in its spell ever since. He explains how it began and why it still blinds you today.
So just for the one most obvious example, anthropocentrism tends to be the worldview of all these dominant ideologies and cultures and belief systems under what we call now the dominant worldview. Whereas, quite a different understanding of humans' position in the world occurs under the great diversity of different indigenous perspectives.
Why is the indigenous worldview such a threat to the hegemony?
If you are a devout believer of a particular religion, if you are a devout believer in a particular system of capitalism that has made you wealthy, if you have a strong belief of something your father told you, it's very difficult for you to be open-minded enough to change your mind no matter what the evidence is. We know this. The why is protecting the turf and the power and the wealth and the false assumptions. And that's why metacognitive work has to happen.
What Four Arrows revealed was unsettling. The same language that can heal a body can also program a culture. When repetition, authority, and emotion converge, they can form a trance, a collective hypnosis. It's how society learns what to fear, whom to obey, and what to believe. But this kind of hypnosis only moves in one direction, outward, downward, into conformity. The indigenous worldview cannot be imposed this way. It isn't a counterspell or a rival ideology. It's an awakening that happens one person at a time. Recovering it is not a mass movement. It's a personal journey, an inner de-hypnotizing that begins with awareness.
All of our hypnosis comes from the understandings that we get from our environment, from our elders, from our teachers. So for 99% of human history, the understandings that we had were that we were a part of nature, and that, if anything, the trees and the creatures who came before us, according to the handed down oral understandings, were our teachers. And so they understood what even Darwin eventually found when he wrote Descent of Man. He said, look, I'm going to talk about a particular phenomenon, but he was saying, no, the main way that the world is shaped is symbiotic. That understanding was there for 99% of human history. So therefore, choices for hypnosis were about that. Ceremony was a direct way for that. All humans have the same potential vices. And so when an organization or a tribe or people there was other individuals who started to corrupt and had influence, and they started to move off away from that understanding of how to live on this planet, they would catch it and they would do ceremony, and individuals would do it. All right? Well, we got the same thing happening because somewhere along the line, a couple of natives during a drought had a surplus for the first time in history, and they thought, you know, my greed is showing up here a little bit, brother. What the heck with these things that we've been doing for 99% of human history? We are in a position of power here. And something happened maybe 9,000 years ago probably in the area of Turkey where that caught on, and they used power and force initially to do that. And then pretty soon they created hierarchies to do that. And then the hierarchies maintained it. So that's kind of how it got started.
How do you create the space for self-hypnosis away from that?
And I'm glad you asked it that way, because initially, people think, oh, this is a way that someone's going to hypnotize somebody to have another one. But when this vision came to me, it took me 15 years to figure it out. And I started with that idea. Oh, we needed a different hypnotic directive. Because in hypnosis, there's an acronym I use, credible, confidence, rapport, expectation, and then the directive. And then the directive has to be provide an image that's relatively believable, that will be taken literally with just the right amount of enthusiasm. I can apply that to Rush Limbaugh, to Donald Trump, to lots of orators. The access, eventually I understood, it can't be using external hypnosis. It has to be going back and finding out why we do what we do, and then looking at why we do what we do through the four main influences of why we do what we do: fear, authority, words, and nature. When one recognizes that most people under a dominant worldview sees and understands fear, authority, words, and nature in an extremely different 180 degrees way than the indigenous one, if somebody is so insane that they think everything is perfect, they probably aren't going to enter into a metacognitive exercise. But I would say, in private, if they had this tool and nobody was around, and they know I'm not happy. I haven't met too many really very wealthy men that didn't have major problems with all kinds of things, and they say nobody's looking. Yeah, I'm just going to try this, right? There's no threat there because they're just getting honest. But as epigenetics has shown us, and hypnosis has shown us, this truth-seeking can transform overnight.
We were getting closer to an answer, though not the one I'd expected. There would be no quick fix, no counter-hypnosis to reverse the trance of destruction. The forces behind authoritarianism, poverty, racism, war, and planetary ecosystem collapse couldn't be met with the same tools of persuasion that caused them. Real change, Foriero's explained, begins when people awaken inside their own connection to the world, one by one.
I believe that peace is the natural quality of humans. We've got to get away from this game of who's right, a game of violence and punishment, and into a place of balance and harmony and recognizing complementarity in everything. In Lakota, there is a word, Wolokokichiapi. And when someone tried to describe what that meant, it is almost impossible to say in English, but I'll try. Wolokokichiapi is a sense of autonomy that you might associate with a warrior. It's a sense of standing for what is right that you might associate with being a warrior. It's a sense for being in control so that you are always in this place of balance, which is another aspect of, Marine Corps training. And yet, the essence of the definition is similar to the Navajo Hoso, which means being in a place of tranquil, loving beauty and peacefulness. And so how those go together is, you know, in this place of Kichiapi. And so I think we're at a place in our world where the default of militarism is so powerfully strong that it's time for us to get to the opposite of fear and using the virtues that together really are about peace. Patience, generosity, honesty, all of those are the dynamic structure of peacefulness.
Before returning home, we held an Inipi ceremony in Four Arrows, Temescal, where I had a vision. CAT-FAWN blazing in lights, like on the 1970s Times Square theater marquee, just as Four Arrows had described it. Then it resolved into the pixels on an LED billboard in the modern Times Square, before going out over the network to computer screens and mobile devices everywhere. And then I understood. Content, whether in the form of books, podcasts, films, or workshops, wasn't enough to hold the vision. This powerful way of being was meant to live inside the system shaping our lives. So I built Kinship Intelligence as a living, reflective technology to restore the web of relations we had lost. A system not driven by extraction and attention, but supported by reciprocity and care. Where other systems polarize and control, kinship integrates and connects, so no one carries the weight of the world alone. Kinship is a place where we can live, create, and thrive together. To bring it into consciousness.
And I took a near-death experience in the middle of Copper Canyon to have that truth emerge. I mean, it didn't come from my thinking. I mean, well, 15 years of trying to understand it did, but it was there.